Welcome, everyone, tonight, and happy Groundhog's Day. It's nice to see so many familiar faces here. We have a wonderful session planned for you this evening. What we're going to do, in contrast to what we've done in years in the past, is this year we're going to do this all in one large group session. And that allows us to record this meeting. So just be aware that as you speak and ask questions, those will be recorded. Hopefully that will not be too stifling for you. What we're going to do is have 4 sections, and we have wonderful speakers for you to introduce each topic and answer your questions about those topics. So I'll tell you the 4 topics that are going to be presented. We'll talk first about the clinical vignettes and posters, and that'll be Doctors Dobbin Chow and Sneha Thomas are going to talk about that. Then we'll talk about research abstracts, and then research posters, and finally, clinical vignette abstracts. And we'll have each presenter introduce themselves at the beginning of each session and talk about give us an overview about what they're going to talk about. I will, in a minute, I'll put in the chat some links to ACP resources available to you to help you make sure that your presentations are polished and in the format that they ask for and ready to roll. I think any of us on this call are going to be willing to work with you and help coach you. We're super excited about some of the events coming up. And speaking about events coming up, we have a couple of really exciting ones ahead. So the Williams Student Conference, you should have all gotten information from Mary Ellen about already, but if you haven't, take out a pen and put on your calendar, February 18th. This will be at Midtown Towers at the University of Maryland Midtown campus. That's on Linden Avenue in Baltimore. And there'll be a poster presentation. There'll be a student's dilemma or competition going on. There'll be an Ironman, and there'll be a few different talks that'll be very, very, very high quality. So judges will be coming by, looking at your posters, giving you some coaching. I always like to go behind Dobbin because Dobbin does a lot of teaching while he's coaching, and I learn a bunch by listening to him, and then I stand there and look like I'm smart because I just repeat what Dobbin says. It's really a fun time. So make sure you get your posters in for the Williams Student Conference. The deadline for that is February the 11th. We also have the residence meeting that's coming up. That's a Mulholland Moeller residence meeting. Oh, I skipped my deadline there. Sorry. Let me go back to where that is. Good. So the date of that is May 11th, Thursday, May 11th. Thank you, Dr. Kuhl and her colleagues who host this at St. Agnes. It's always a really wonderful event. It starts again at 8:30 in the morning with the poster session. It's huge and amazing and wonderful how many people present to the residence poster session. Make sure that if you are a resident and plan to submit to that meeting, that you submit your abstract to your residency program director by March the 4th so that they can review it and give approval for submission to the meeting. The vignettes, the clinical vignettes, are due to your program director by April the 1st. So just keep in mind those deadlines. And if you have any questions, reach out to Mary Ellen because she knows everything about everything, as it turns out. All right. So without further ado, we can go ahead and start with our first session with the clinical vignettes with Doctors Thomas and Chow.
Thank you. I'm Dobbin Chow. I'm program director at University of Maryland Medical Center Midtown, and I have with me Sneha Thomas, who's one of our chief residents. Now, what you just heard was that Colleen said that you should be prepared and know what you're going to do and have your materials ready. Now, am I talking about the abstracts or talking about posters?
On my schedule, it's Mary Ellen, you can correct me if I'm wrong. It's a clinical
poster. Posters. All right.
Poster.
Good.
The on the poster.
All right. I was just checking.
But just proving the point that Java can talk about anything.
Okay.
And that's about getting ready and knowing what you're supposed to do, right, Dobbin?
What are you trying to say? Okay, I'm gonna. All right, I'm gonna share a. So I'm gonna. We have short out of time, and enough filibustering. I'm gonna show. So if I can share my screen, and we're gonna go through some posters together. All right. And I hope that please utilize your chat function to share your. Do you guys see the screen? All right. So here's a poster. Here's a poster, and okay. So let me see if I can. What do you all think about this poster? Give me your first impressions.
Too many words.
Too many. Maybe a couple extra too many words. Right. This is a hard poster to if you're walking past this poster, you may not stop to look. It's just it's busy. And you're going to think this is going to take a lot of work for me to commit to try to digest this poster. All right. So the message here is that you don't have to have text that's written out in a paragraph form. You can have text that's in bullet form. You have to have text that's readable and legible, and it's comfortable for the reader. Now, the one way that you organize, I don't know if you guys can see my arrow here, my pointer, but typically you organize your posters so that you go down one side, and then which is the left side, and then you go down the right side, and then in the middle are your diagrams, your images, your EKG, and those are things that will often catch the eye of a viewer at first glance, and so the organization, and I've wonder if the other folks have opinions on this. Is that there's some kind of introductory paragraph, there's a case presentation, there's a discussion, and then there should be a message. And the key, and how do you know if you've succeeded in your poster? How do you know if people are going to walk away and they're going to be excited and give you a high five after you've finished your presentation? It's if they're going to go back home and somehow they will change their practice. Now you've imparted to them some new information to them that's going to alter the way they're going to practice medicine, that they're going to approach the next patient a little bit differently. And if you've done that, then you won the day. Okay. So usually you try to send a message home by putting in some little box called the take-home message or the key pearls or summary statement that will help. All right, so I'm going to take this poster down. This didn't quite meet our standard, right? And then so here's another one. All right, can you see this one? All right, so I told this to our resident. I said, you got to put a key message. What does he do? Look at this. He put a key message in there, and it hits you in the face. Now you know what? He thought that when there's hundreds of posters and people are walking around and looking at posters, that if you put a big message there that's attractive, that's compelling, then you might bring an audience to you. So he said that the most important thing was that people will leave his poster not caring so much about the case description itself and about the CT findings, but more that this is the message that he's trying to send. I don't know. What do you all what do y'all think about this? Dave, are you impressed with this?
Yeah. I do like being drawn to I mean, it definitely is an eye catcher. Your eyes get drawn immediately to, their point, their visuals are there. It distracts a little bit from the other material that's there. And I've gone back and forth in my mind. I know a lot of places, are kind of going towards these types of posters when the message is dead center in your eye and you kind of take home that message. But I think in the end, I'm not in favor of this personally, but I think the other important components of this are kind of lost in the shuffle a bit with this in their face type thing. But that's my personal preference. I think other people may have other opinions.
Well, as we all know, Dave Weissman is very hard to impress. All right, so let me take this one down. Sneha, feel free to jump in if you have any wisdom to impart, because I'm just filibustering here. All right, so here's another poster, and what I wanted. So this is a pretty busy poster, and this is a pretty. I think this is a pretty complicated case, and the reason I just bring this to your bring this poster to your attention is that there's different ways to organize your information. So and I'm sure that many of the residents will have really complicated cases with long, protracted medical history and data, and so one way to try to present all that data is to do this timeline approach. See how he's got a timeline down here: month 1, month 3, month 4, and as you present the case, you can walk your audience through this timeline, and they can read the timeline, follow it with you. So think about this as a way to present your case if it's a complicated case with a long, protracted medical history. Now he does try to include some key points, some summary points here in the conclusion, which is helpful. What I want to point out to you is that number one, try to keep the font the same size throughout your poster, except for the references. You can make those fonts smaller. Also, the title of under each figure, those can be smaller. Make sure you label each figure and you refer to the figure in the text somewhere. If you don't refer to the figure, then that figure didn't need to be in your poster. You need to have referred to it in some way. You want to call attention to it in some way. And when you do that, what's going to happen is the reader is going to be looking at the text, and then they're going to go to the figure, and after they look at the figure, they'll go back to your text. So, Mariella, keep me honest in terms of time. If I'm up against the time, just shut me down. All right, Sneha, Sneha, you have any comments? Any thoughts?
No, I was just gonna say in this one, in increasing the size of the only the institutional sign may be way too small here, but I think you also have other images and to kind of say where you're from and things like that. That's helpful. I think, but the rest of it is pretty evenly spread out and not too wordy, and it's easy to read the letters, and even though it's a different format than the format we talked about, the standard, it still kind of gives all the images and the words and everything, and you can still read well.
Yeah. So people are going to come to this poster and they're going to be a little bit thrown off because they're used to the normal sequence of going down the left side, then going down the middle, then going down the right side, and this one sort of goes across. It's a little bit of a little bit. It's a little it can throw folks off. I can see that there's some nice comments here. That maybe not many different fonts, and try to keep the fonts not too scary.
I like this time. I don't know if hopefully I'm not choppy, David. with my internet. But I like the idea of the timeline. I think that's really nice because, some of these cases are complex. They're drawn out over periods of time, and the follow that is kind of nice. Although I do like symmetry in the poster personally as well. It becomes a little asymmetric, but that's just the style, Yeah, that's no style.
Yeah.
Dobbin, if I may, so two things that I think that I love the timeline, except the timeline I think can be condensed and with lesser, I cannot do the video because I'm driving. Sorry, guys. It would be a lesser amount of writing in the timeline, maybe making 1 or 2 points and using imagery in there. And then the way the images are, it kind of detracts from the images where they are because between the images and what's on top in the institutional thing, it all seems very crowded, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So in that sense, I think that they're detracting from what they would like to do, that is create a beautiful timeline and talk about it. And that symmetry and that placing it, maybe these are the pictures you place in the end or below so that there is symmetry in it. So I think that it's important when you create these timelines that you're able to also accommodate everything else and not find every nook and cranny and cram it up with things, because then it looks cramped.
Yes, that's a great that's a great point. Okay, so here's another timeline. You guys, can you see that? So there's another, and so he's but what he's done is he at week 4, the image that here corresponds to week 4, and then at week 7 the image here corresponds to week 7, so that you can match images with points on this timeline. And of course, this is also a little bit of a protracted course with a fair amount of detailed history here, but I think it works because he as he presents the case, he's going to go through the timeline. He's going to refer to the images as he goes through it.
All right, Davin, I'm going to jump in a little bit to give you the gong.
Okay.
You,
All right.
Dr. Thomas, thank you so much. I know this is really fast, but I want to make sure that we give each presenter 15 minutes to do their thing, and then we'll have a little bit of time at the end for Q&A. So next, we're going to move on to the research abstracts, and this is Drs. Janaki Deepak and Dr. Andrew Kithis. I think Janaki may be driving, and I wonder if Andrew should start.
Andrew, it is all Andrew. I'm just there on the side.
Yep. Thank you, Dr. Christmas. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the party. My name is Andrew Kithis. I'm one of the chief residents at the University of Maryland downtown. I'm based mainly over at Mercy, so that's where I am right now. So we're going to go through a little PowerPoint that we put together about research abstract writing. So, did I do that right? Is everybody seeing this?
We are. You just need to put it in slideshow mode.
There we go.
Oh, good.
And now in the upper left, click on display settings, and we want to flip it.
Ooh,
There you go.
fancy. Okay, I'm learning. I might be a millennial, but I'm still technologically impaired. Okay, so I think the big thing to remember about abstract writing is kind of like how Dr. Shao mentioned with the posters, is there's certain areas you kind of have to hit. There's a little bit less leeway with abstract writing as far as, getting creative and how you're going to format it when you go and write an abstract. And I think that's really the first point that I wanted to hit, is that you really want to know the rules for the meeting that you're writing this abstract for, because formatting rules can change from one meeting to another or from one journal to another. So even I've seen it get as nitty gritty as, the font, the spacing, the size of the font, the word count definitely always matters. So you want to really take the time before you even sit down to write, I think, to really know what the rules are of the place you're going for, because it can get a little picky here and there. usually when we put together one of these abstracts, there's, about 5 general sections, I think. The titles of these may change a little bit. They may call it an introduction, they may call it a purpose, but I think it tends to fit in the same little box. So first one up, when we go to the title and author information, so you really, again, you want to pay attention to the formatting. And I kind of like the tip that I got actually from the ACP website that I think you're going to get from Dr. Christmas and Mary Ellen. Kind of write down the key points of your research as a sentence. Kind of what do you think summarizes and really gets at the main thesis of what you're doing. Just write it out as a sentence and then kind of progressively work down from there. You want to convey the main point, but you want to kind of keep it as sort of compact as possible. And then when you get down to the list of authors, make sure that you have everybody's institutional affiliations and everything as correct as possible. So here's just a couple examples from some abstracts that I pulled. So the top one here, we see the effect of JAK inhibitors and methotrexate combination on the risk of malignancy in patients with rheumatoid arthritis, systematic review and meta-analysis of randomized controlled trials. I think the title definitely gets at the main point of what's going to be presented. I think you could make an argument maybe it's a little bit wordy, that sort of a thing, but it definitely conveys the main thesis. The second one I included there to just kind of show an example of how different authors can be listed and making sure that you have those author affiliations in there as well. Okay. Next up, we move on to the introduction. And I think this is sort of your chance to be maybe a little bit creative. You want to kind of grab everybody's attention. There's a lot of people who are going to be reviewing, or there's a lot of abstracts that the reviewers will be reading, and you want to kind of try to stand out in any way you can when you don't have as much of the kind of creative windows as you do when you're making a poster. The next section of this paragraph really is about describing the question that you're going to try to answer and kind of summarizing where the research is at up until that point. And I think the key thing with the introduction is kind of to say how what you're presenting is going to fill in some of those gaps. So this is taken from that same rheumatoid arthritis abstract that I had the title from before. And you can see here that the author mentions, gives you a little bit of a broad overview of rheumatoid arthritis just in one sentence, and then really gets to the point as far as dealing with methotrexate and the JAK inhibitors, while kind of giving you a little bit of a summary of where the research stands at this point. And then that last sentence there states kind of, this is what we're going to do. So you want to give kind of an overview, this is where things stand, and this is what I'm going to do to try to make a contribution to this field. I think the methods section is really tough in an abstract because you really don't have that much space. And, you can make this really, really long if you were going to write an article about this, but we really need to kind of get this point across in as little amount of space as possible. You do want to make sure that you're hitting, what was the design of this project we were doing? Where was it done? If you're doing something with a certain number of subjects, or in this case, the one we're looking at, number of articles, you want to say, how many subjects and how are they selected? Describe your intervention, and definitely you want to name what outcome variables are you actually looking at. And if you have room, maybe try to mention, what sort of statistical methods you used. So here, since the abstract we're looking at is more of a review, they've mentioned the databases that they looked through, kind of what they used as the keywords to make their search. And then it describes the endpoints and lists the statistical kind of methods that they use to come up with this sort of a analysis, which I think does a good job of sort of getting their methods across. In the results, this is really where you get a chance to kind of describe a little bit further about the subjects. Sometimes this can be done as a table, again, depending on the formatting requirements of the journal or the meeting that you're going to. You always want to make sure, again, I think just as a general rule, always use standard deviations or the 95% confidence intervals with your level of kind of statistical significance. And really the key thing here is just to stick to those formatting regulations as well. So if we see here, they go through kind of the number of publications that they screened, how many patients that gave them to analyze, and then they get into a little bit more of the nitty-gritty with the statistics. And I think that's really the big point of the results. This is where you're going to state your numbers. And that's why, if you can, I think using a table here can be useful, but that's going to really depend on what meeting or what journal you're going for. Okay, and then you get to conclude everything. And this one, I don't think this needs to be too long. Just a couple of sentences stating what can be concluded. The big thing here, just like with anything that we do in medicine, opinion in this case is kind of your enemy. You really want to make sure that whatever you're concluding, whatever big statements you're going to draw are coming from the data that you obtained, I think is the big thing, which I think is something that, I think we all learn pretty well. You just want to make sure that you kind of stay within those boundaries. And if you have time or space, make sure that you mention, how generalizable is your information? How can this be broadened to, or can it be broadened to a kind of wider population base? So here, this is the conclusion from that abstract that we've been looking at. And you can see it's just 2 relatively medium short sentences or so that kind of sum up what they found and how they think that can be applied in the future. And the last little slide I have here, this is just kind of some final things that I think is good to know. Medical jargon has its place. I think it can get a little bit overblown in an abstract format. And try not to use too many abbreviations. If you do use an abbreviation, make sure you spell it out the first time, put the abbreviation in parentheses. And then I included some links here to, I'm pretty sure these are going to be the similar resources that you're going to get from Dr. Christmas and Mary Ellen. But these have come in handy for me when I've written stuff in residency and in med school. So I don't know if I have, wait a minute. How do I get out? Ooh.
Yeah. While Andrew is looking, thanks, Andrew, for that awesome presentation. And I would say that when we are looking at research abstracts, we are trying to go through so much of data in such a short space that you want it to be as clear as possible. Make sure that you don't go from methods to results without any space in between. As it is, everything is crammed in. There are a lot of numbers. Try to be as clear as possible. You don't need to write every single thing about everything in that research abstract. You just want to get the most important information in there. So try to be, and if you need to mention limitations, mention a sentence on limitations, right? When we're looking at it, we want to see if it's for a meeting, then should it come as a poster or should it come as an oral presentation? So the data, the way it is presented, so it's not only what research you have done, it's how you have presented it. What all have you done good work in actually doing it the right way? All that matters. So sit down, write it, rewrite it, get it looked at by your mentors, your peers, have multiple people look at it before you put it there, because sometimes that's what determines whether something goes as a poster presentation, a thematic poster, a poster discussion, or is it going as an oral presentation? And as you all know, all of them are important, but the minute you get called to do an oral presentation, that's a big deal. You get to actually talk more about your research. So it is important that you do the research, but it's very important on how you present it.
Well, those are both fantastic presentations, both from Dr. Kithis and Dr. Deepak. And in fact, Andrew, you're ahead of schedule. So you're like living the mission, like succinct, organized, clear. Mwah, that was perfect.
Lead by example.
Exactly. I love it. I love it. It was great. And Dr. Deepak mentioned making sure that your mentor reviews this. I would say it's, sort of a pro tip is to have to give the presentation, or if it's an oral presentation, or to have someone read, if it's a written presentation, a written abstract, someone who is not familiar with this research. Because the idea of an abstract is that you look at it and you get the key messages right away, even if you don't do that kind of work. And so have someone who's not in your field take a look at this, and does it make sense to them? Are there a couple of key points that they got from it, which are the ones that you actually intended for them to get from that? Great. So we'll just keep things rolling for now so that we have plenty of time for discussion at the end. So the next section is going to be on the research poster presentation. And so we're fortunate for this section to have Drs. David Weissman and Dr. Ying Jin Chen. Sorry, I mispronounced that.
That's right.
Presenting.
Excellent. So I was going to start this briefly. Can everybody see my screen, the poster? Is that looking good? Okay, great. I'm having problems with my internet. If it sounds too choppy, please let me know. I can turn my video off. That may help. So I just wanted to briefly kind of go over kind of what Dr. Chow did with the poster, how a research poster should look, how it should not look. And then I wanted Dr. Chen to kind of review how she prepared last year for her oral research presentation. She won the #1 ACP research oral research last year. It was very exciting. So I just wanted to give her time to do that. So this example is what I would call not such a good example of a research poster. And so, generally speaking, research posters have a lot of information to convey, right? And they can be extraordinarily overwhelming. And not to overwhelm your audience with data. And I think that's unfortunately what this poster does. By the way, I did get permission from everybody on these posters, and I did participate in this study. And so, and just bring it out there, color schemes are important. Eye-catching things are important, where your eye is drawn to. In general, the middle section is kind of where our eye goes. And you want this section to look eye-pleasing. And you want the data to stand out. And the key points you want to have highlighted, or decide if you really need to show every little piece of data from your study. I know we're excited. We want to present everything we did. And this actually turned out to be a nice study. We actually ultimately got it published in the American Journal of Medicine. But I would argue that this poster fell very short for various reasons. One, I think the big issue here to me was the data representation in the tables. And this is not easy stuff to do, to be thoughtful about presenting the data, whether you choose figures, whether you choose tables. I tend to be more of a table person. I'm curious about the other faculty, what they say. I'm going to show you an example of two research posters that won #1 over the last couple of years. And both of those presenters chose figures. And I think figures do often convey information better than perhaps a data table would. Although I tend to like data tables probably because it's easier for me, and I'm not as clever to come up with these neat figures, which can sometimes convey information better. One of the things I kind of did like about this particular poster is kind of the method section. They talked about, how patients were accrued for this study, what particularly patients were included in this study. I think that is clear. The primary and secondary outcomes are written out pretty clearly there. The discussionary points, again, there's a lot of points there. And do we really, I probably would highlight a few. Here you can see the take-home message here is a jumbling of 4 messages. I think you probably should choose one message, honestly, with a research poster to have as your final comments. That's my opinion. I don't know if anybody has. Please feel free to ask questions on mute if you like. Another example I have here, this is data from a different study looking at advanced care planning at the end of life and how successful we were. And this is when a geriatric practice. And I just bring this one here to show I personally like the use of the tables here. You can see the color schemes, how well they work in presenting data. And I think ultimately in a poster, that's what it's all about, is making the poster easy to read. I love the fonts. The fonts look great here. The spacing is great. It's legible. The one take-home conclusion on the right is excellent. So this poster is eye-appealing to me. I could read it. I could go through it. I could make sense of it very quickly and not have to get eye strained as like the first poster. The last example I'm going to show you, we did a little bit of meta-analysis recently for the ACP abstracts. And when it comes to a poster, a meta-analysis is a lot of work that goes into a meta-analysis. And there's a lot of data here as well. I would prefer to see your main outcomes table, whether it's in the forest plots pictured here, in the center. As you can see, there's a lot of results they want to share. I'm just way overwhelmed by results. I really can't focus myself on the key components of these outcomes. the studies that were included. I would have probably made this, which I can interpret a lot easier, my center point, and probably had a few other little things off to the side, but not much, and just my conclusion there. So that's how I would suggest doing a meta-analysis poster, is have the forest plot, your main outcomes plot, in the center of the poster. So the last two I'm going to show briefly. I want to make sure, Colleen, keep me on time. I want to make sure Dr. Chen has time, please, for her discussion real quick. She'll review. This was a winning poster several years ago, about 2 years ago, I believe. I have to say, this is a nice, well done, clean poster looking at IVIGG treatment in patients in reduction of hospital complications from pneumonia. And I liked how they highlighted the key statistical outcomes here. That makes it easy for your eye to say, okay, great, length of stay was reduced, ICU length of stay was reduced. I can easily go through and see the outcomes. I can see here the figures are well done. They did viral evaluations on these patients to determine what the underlying cause of pneumonia was, if they could, and it's easily displayed there. So I think this is a nice example of a clean poster, well done, data representation, figures even off to the side, but the main data table is dead center right in front of you. And the take-home conclusions, I probably would have had the take-home conclusion maybe even a little larger than this, perhaps. But it's hard when you got a lot of information to share. Do we really need all this? These were in transplant patients, by the way. And maybe I didn't need this figure here. Maybe I did. And it's a judgment call, but you really want that take-home message to really pop. And finally, this was the winning abstract from last year's competition, looking at coronary artery calcium scores in a high-risk population and how it correlates. And you see what the author here did, just a kind of a nice centerpiece of their outcomes, looking at the coronary artery calcium distribution among various patient populations, and their discussion and take-home point in a nice bulleted box. And ultimately, I got to say, what really wins, whether it's a CV poster or a research poster, is really the presentation more than the actual poster itself. The poster is nice, but I'll never forget, several years ago, we had one of our residents win the CV poster overall. And if I showed you that poster, you'd be shocked that it won. And it was really not so much the poster as the presenter. So it's how you present. And that's where I want to get. Dr. Chen, please, you gave an outstanding presentation last year. Tell us how you did it. You out there? There's just, you might be muted. Maybe not. I can't hear you. Can we hear Dr. Chen? Yeah, I can't hear it. Jinji, we can't hear you for some reason.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now we
can. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Dr. Wiseman. I would say without your guidance, I cannot be presenting in that way. I really appreciate your guidance and all the faculties. If you don't mind, can I just share the screen so just I can walk through how I prepare the oral presentation?
Yes, go ahead and hit the green share button at the bottom of your screen.
Yeah, let me do this way. All right, so can you see my screen, my presentation, the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay, great. So this is how I prepare for the oral presentation. Basically, my understanding about the oral presentation, it is two parts. One is you have your slides, you have the written content to show the audience, share with the audience. The second is the way that you present. So it's a communication, it's a conversation. It is not only that, you present this showing the screen and you have them to read. So I would like to have the interaction with the audience. So I also would like the audience to listen to me rather than just read. So that's why when I'm preparing it, also as Dr. Wiseman said, this research, we want to go through these, the format of the presentation, right? But I would here, I have the title, it is eye-catching, the second, background. I make that is like bullet points. I don't want people to spend too much time to read my slide and get distracted. So I only have the big titles and small bullet points, and I have a very small little fonts for my references. Then during the oral presentation, you would like to draw the attention from the audience, right? So I would like to bring up a question. So that is the way you can interact with your audience. So bring up the question, how we can resolve our research problem. Then we bring up the research design. Then this is the way that it is a bullet points, and I give a timeline. So the audience can imagine, picturizing in their head, oh, this is how we design the study and how we collect the data, and later how we do these analysis. So in further, we give an overall picture, then further into details. So like inclusion criteria and exclusion criteria as well. Then we also would like to mention about study population, and that is using bullet points so audience can listen to me more. Descriptive standard statistic analysis, that is very short. You don't generally, that is the shorter message that you don't spend so much time, then you just only have 1 or 2 sentences. Result. So this is the way that I present the result. So this is basically, I'm showing that how we get into our, go through the inclusion criteria, how we got the study population. So this is the way I would like to use a flow chart and walk the audience through, and then how we get these patients. And showing the table, that is one of the key points. When we show the key point, I also use for example, you can tell, so you probably can tell that I use some animation. So you can see when I talk, then I can click the button, then you can see how I highlight it. And last, I will give a eye-catching point that is a key point, that is the most important thing. Then I will very quickly go through some important things, but like I would save my time to read the numbers, but I will go through what are the comparisons and go through these key points, the p-value that is most important, and come to our conclusion and discussion and conclusion. So you will present your data, but in a clean way, but you do not want to read all these numbers, but just highlight the numbers that you want to have the audience to remember. The next would do in terms of the discussion. Generally, you would like to compare your study and your peer study, and I use the different colors to make them to see the differences. Lastly, you would like to give the limitation. Always want to comment that your study needs some way to improve, etc. And the conclusion. So the key point is that I also highlighted, and I give our future studies some potentials. So generally, when I prepare it, I have an overall picture what the information I would like to deliver to this audience. Let me stop sharing. So I would like to stop. So basically, I would like to think through what information I would like to deliver to the audience, then what would be the better way to present them, and what questions the audience would like to raise. And maybe this is a question maybe they will have. Then I will leave a little bit like guidance. Then probably they will prompt them to ask the questions. Then they will more engage into the presentation. Then I show them the result. Then they will be, this is what I'm expecting. So this is how I prepare the presentation. That's from the slides wise. In terms of presentation, practice. That is the only way. So you would like to practice many, many times. I lost count how many times I have practiced. And also you would like to practice with your peers, practice your PIs. Like I said, Dr. Wiseman gave me a lot of good suggestions. And another thing very important is time. I practice when I also time myself. So make sure you're not over time yours, then you don't want to exceed it. Basically, that is the way I prepare for my presentation.
Awesome.
Thank you so much, Dr. Weissman and Chen. And I think, hearing how much attention to detail was put into that presentation gives you some inkling about why Dr. Chen was such a wonderful award winner. All right, great. You're welcome. Let's move on to our last major heading then, and then we'll have time for questions and discussion. So our last section is really focusing on the clinical vignette abstract. So this will be Drs. Sapna Kul and Dr. Hamim Kausar. Take it away. I don't know which one of you is going first.
Sure. We're going to try to tag team. And so please, Hamim, feel free to chime in anytime. Can you see my slides? Okay, great. Great. So thank you all for coming. I'm Sapna Kul, and Dr. Kausar is my colleague who's a program director, newly minted program director out in Tidal Health in Salisbury, Maryland, and we're very happy to be here with you today. So, talking about writing a clinical vignette or a case report, it is one of the oldest ways of medical communication. Many, many times, this is where things started. Somebody noticed something interesting. And I'm sorry, my cat wants to join too. And suddenly, here we go. We have new ideas, new things that people find out. So case reports and case series are very, very important. But there are some very important rules for format and length. So basically, what is a clinical vignette? It could be one case or more than one, like a case series about a new disease entity, which is pretty hard to find these days, but it happens. Look at COVID. So you can have prominent or unusual clinical features of an established disease. And that is much more common. It's quickly a summary of the history, physical findings, lab data, and again, the take-home or teaching points. One of the hardest things for students and residents early on is this case worth presenting? It is hard to know sometimes. This sounds great. I've never seen a case of this. However, it's important to run it by your mentors, to talk to people. And sometimes it may be a common disease, but an unusual presentation or a challenge in diagnosis. That might be the hook that might make the case worth presenting. What do you think, Hamim?
I completely agree. For the case report, because there are so many cases, and that's the most common way of presentation in residency. So what is your selling point? You will start with that I am here because of this. And that's how you get your audience attracted to the poster or presentation that you have.
Right. Great. And then some common questions we often get asked. Can I use the same vignette for different meetings? So this is where there's a little bit of a caveat. Yes, but the presentation of original work at the chapter meeting may jeopardize presentations before other societies. So we prefer you present here. That has been our usual tradition here. But so check with presentation at other societies as well and what their rules are. So check rules there. Now, is the title important? Absolutely. It's what draws people in. Sometimes people get quite crazy and catchy with it. So be careful. Run that title by several people. Sometimes it tells you the whole story. Sometimes it's a teaser. And the authorship is very important. Who contributes to the write-up? Not just everybody was involved in the care of a patient. These days, there may be multiple people involved. Any thoughts?
No, that's one of the trend now. I tell our residents that I have seen case report published or written by 8 authors from 5 institutions. You know, so
How did that all happen?
so I think you are absolutely right. If just because of somebody took care of the patient does not qualify that person to be the author.
And just because they're a friend of yours does not mean they also end up on that case either. So other things, what are the sections? I think they're pretty straightforward. It's even shorter than for research. A short intro, case description, and a discussion. Why these decisions were made. Sometimes there may be a complex, a long admission, or there were some twists and turns in the story that you might have to explain, and then the key points. Anything here, Hamim?
No, I think you covered everything.
What else should you know? Well, for submission for ACP, they must be reviewed, signed off by a program director. What format should you use? We'll show you in the next slide. Please remember to keep the small font 10 or greater. Sometimes, in a desire to fit more information, the font gets very small. Please don't go there. Just 2-3 paragraphs. Don't have to have all the history, all the physical, just the relevant information. Here is an example of a clinical vignette. You can see a nice title, intro, case, and conclusion. And I'm going to show you. This is the box you will get from Mary Ellen. Please don't try to stretch it to fit it all in either. And I have this, again, that same abstract written out so you can read it out there. But I thought this was a good example of clearly telling you what the story is about. Yes, this patient has multiple issues, but this is not where you're going to talk through all of them. Focus in on the issues that were relevant. Tell us about it and why. Hamim, any thoughts?
No, I think that is absolutely right. I agree with that. So you are here to present something very interesting or something very unique. So you don't need to talk about everything. Focus on one area. This is a poster and you will be presenting in 5 minutes. So focus on what you are trying to tell the audience. And also when you present, be prepared to answer all the questions relevant to that finding. Because if they ask, is there any other cases like that, or how other cases are managed, and you have no idea, that will not look good.
Excellent point, Hamim. And just because you are not putting certain other parts of the pathologies in that patient, you should know that patient very well. And even if it's not a data point on your case presentation, discussions may lead to that, and you should have that information with you, should it be needed. Here's a little checklist that's provided by ACP, and if you go to the links that Dr. Christmas sent you, you will see some of these kinds of checklists to keep you on track as you try to present. Get ready to get your abstracts in a timely fashion to your program director. And I think I just had one more abstract to share, but again, just to give you an example, that cases can differ a lot, and sometimes it is apples and oranges, but how well you put it together. What was your engagement in the case? What were you able to learn from this, and why do you want to share it with your colleagues? It's so important, and your passion comes through. We love to hear that. But any other thoughts from any of our other presenters and colleagues here?
The thing I would say for case reports, it doesn't matter, case reports or clinical vignette, posters or anything. If you're including radiological images, always make sure that you've gone to the radiologist, you've asked them for the best picture and the best pixels. Like, you want it to be the highest definition image to kind of put your case through, especially if it's a case report. If it's pathology slides, again, go to your friendly pathologist, sit with them and take the best picture. Do not try to take the iPhone or Samsung version of any picture and post that into there, because then it loses that quality. So pictures are important. So use the resources that you all have. You all have radiologists everywhere. You have pathologists everywhere. They are more than happy to pick a lovely picture for you, and they get so excited.
To add to that with Dr. Deepak, if you have a pathology, a slide, a histopathology slide, or an image, you also want to know the structures. Where is the abnormalities? You want to show that, as well as what is normal, what is around that area. You also want to know those things so that you can explain.
I'll also add my own little personal thing, is that I want to know what happened to the person. So every single case report, I kind of hate the word case actually, is a human being who needs our care, and we should care about them tremendously, so much so that we know whatever happened to them. So if you took care of them in just a sliver, I can guarantee you that if I'm the judge, I'm going to ask you, what happened to this person? How did things turn out for them? Because I want to hear that you actually cared about them as well.
Great points. Thank you, everybody.
Good. Well, that was absolutely fantastic. Thank you to all of our presenters, Drs. Chow, Dr. Thomas, Dr. Deepak, Dr. Kithis, Dr. Weissman, Dr. Chen, Dr. Kuhl, Dr. Kassard. Really fantastic pointers. Help us organize and think about how you're going to present research or clinical vignettes, posters, or abstracts. We have plenty of time now, so we want to open this up to questions you might have. Who are our brave souls who have a few questions they could ask? And if they're directed to a particular presenter, please also let us know about that.
So while we are waiting for the question, I wanted to make a comment about research poster. 22 years ago, my mentor taught me that how to present a poster, and he said things that you cannot say or that you cannot explain by words, that will be in the poster. Because the main attraction there is not the poster, is the presenter. So if you crowd the poster with all the information, copy paste from up to date and everything, then you have no role there. You put the pictures, you put all the data, the figures, the graphs there. Rest of the things you will be explaining. So the audience or the person you are explaining to will be actually looking at you. And then you will direct that, well, this is the picture that I'm talking about with your finger. If you write everything in the poster, it will be crowded. It will not attract the audience, and they will not listen to you. They will be reading that poster.
That's great. And I mean, that actually reminded me, I'm old enough now that I remember back when research presentations were not printed all in one beautiful poster that you unroll and pin up with 4 pins, but they were actually PowerPoint slides that you printed individual segments of the poster and pasted them together at national meetings. And one of my mentors said to me to make sure that each one of those, if it fell on the floor, someone could pick it up and know what your research was about, know what the message of that section was. And I still use that when I think about putting together presentations, to make sure that each section, as you're, if you think of a national meeting, people are sort of strolling by and looking. And so they could look at a section and know pretty quickly the message you're trying to give for each of those sections. So old school tips there. I see a comment in the chat that I'll read out loud and see if any of our panel members could address this. So the question is, when you're trying to cut down an abstract to fit a presentation, any specific guidelines? Where do you start? Any tips? This can be really hard because you collect tons of data, right? You have lots of findings and lots of analysis. How are we going to go about prioritizing that? Any of our speakers willing to take that on?
I can go first. I keep telling, I have a very lovely tobacco coach who loves to write. She likes English language. And when she writes the abstract, it's there is major cutting that has to happen. So I tell people abstracts are not about English language. It's not about knowing the right sentence. It's about getting your words across and using words, not sentences. So this is not, you say, this one presented with, like, as minimum words as possible is the key to abstract. So if you have a sentence, try to see what all words you can cut, because nobody is looking at your grammar in an abstract.
That's such a great point, Dr. Deepak. I almost, it's not quite this, but you almost think that you want your abstract to almost be subliminal messaging, right? The flashing up words that convey a concept. It's not quite that. You want a few words around that, but it doesn't have to be James Joyce. If I have to read for 2 or 3 minutes to understand what it is, I'm just there's 100 other abstracts to look at. I don't have time to do that. So bullet points are just fine. Know where to use bullets and to use those wisely. Use keywords, action verbs that are exciting. Succinct is really good.
I'll
read.
add. Oh, I was going to just add also, like, reread what you wrote, because most of the times you probably repeated yourself in later sections as well, that you can take off those sentences. That's probably not necessary, which I have found very useful, because you think that you haven't said it, or you probably said it in a different word, and you probably don't need that sentence, and you can take some sentences out.
That's such a great point, and I'll get to you next, Dr. Kithis. I think, I think most abstracts that I write or posters that I write, I then go back and cut half of it out because it's redundant, it's superfluous, and so forth. Dr. Kithis?
I think one of the fastest ways, at least for me, to cut things down is to get rid of adjectives. I was a history major, and so I spent all of my undergrad time writing like big long essays with lots of descriptors to like fill a page requirement. I got really good at that, and so writing abstracts was really hard for me initially. And I think part of it is I had been really used to writing these big long flowery sentences that could have been said in like 4 words. And I think part of that is you don't need to say just how important something is, or, you don't have to flower it up. I think getting rid of adjectives, and then, like Sneha said, when you are rereading it, I would reread it out loud. Like, actually read it out loud to yourself, or have somebody read it to you, because then you pick up like, oh, that's kind of saying the same thing, or that sentence doesn't flow right. And that, I think, can kind of help you cut a little bit too.
I love that tip so much. I do that with my own work when I write something, or if I'm preparing to give a presentation. And when I get to the point in the presentation where I'm getting sick of hearing my own voice, I know I've said stuff that doesn't need to be said. That's really terrific. Good.
I had one other tip to say, that if you think of the case and there's a lot of interesting facts, but if you were to present it as a handoff, you are going to think about how to concisely present something to the relevant things. And sometimes abstracts are no different. You're coming down to the real meat of why you're presenting that case, and some of the extra stuff, even though it was fun or interesting, may be just distracting. Exactly, Dr. Kyo. I would like to share with you the same experiences. If I'm presenting the clinical vignette and I want to make the presentation more succinct, just imagine how, as a senior, if I'm a senior, how I present the case to my attending in a very timely fashion. So think about this. That is in the HPI part, case presentation part, just like you're presenting in the ICU, that you need to really cut down the time. So that is a way. Yes, exactly.
Right, or a busy consultant at 2:00 in the morning. So you really want to focus that message. There's a question in the chat about, are behavioral science topics acceptable? What do people think about that?
Absolutely. If they're within the realm of internal medicine, I think go for it.
100%.
Yeah. Of course, I'm assuming it's a patient related. Maybe you could clarify that a little bit more. But I think for example, I think Dr. Chen's was around our biases. So if you're talking about how the psychology of providers works, where we can go wrong, or whether you're talking about mental health diseases in patients that may be relevant to the internal medicine, I'm sure there should be okay.
Sherry Nguyen, I don't know if you're able to unmute and clarify any further, but I think that I think most of us think, yes, a lot of healing that we do in internal medicine has to do with behavior. So in most instances, that will be the case that it's acceptable. All right, great. So in the chat, she says, good, we've got that covered. Good. Other questions or comments?
For posters, try to keep it don't keep it to the colors. Please choose the colors well, because the colors matter. If it's very colorful, as beautiful as the color palette is, there's only so much you can do. So, having a white background with some dark font or something, but just don't go for all colors in one rainbow. That is not the time to go for rainbow colors. So just be aware of that and try not to have yellow fonts in there. And a lot of people do wear glasses, so it is difficult to read if you have really small font. And always for figures, you have to have something that explains the figure. Don't ever have a figure without the actual caption in the end which says exactly what it is.
One other tip I would like to say is sometimes on the PowerPoint, when you're trying to develop a presentation, it's one large PowerPoint slide, and the colors, while it's on your screen, may look very different than when it's actually printed out. The other thing is I would zoom in and look at different sections, because you may not realize how things will look on a poster size. So there are ways you can play with the screen so that you can see how the boxes are and the statements are running out of the box, things like that. So attention to detail, spelling mistakes, we still see that. So please double check those things.
Related to that attention to detail, Dr. Kuhl, I think that a lot of times in medicine, we take a shorthand and we'll say, a numerical value, but not say the units. Those sorts of things actually are pretty important. Not every hospital uses the same units of measurement and so forth. So do look through the details, make sure everything's spelled correctly, make sure you have units when that's appropriate, all those sorts of things.
The other thing I would say is that please make sure that you give your mentors, the other people reviewing your abstract, enough time. If tomorrow's the deadline, please don't give it to them today, because don't know what today may bring, right? They must have had a death in the family, something. They're not going to be able to look at it. And that is basically your abstract, your case report. Give it to people with enough time. So don't start working on a case report or an abstract the day before or the week before. Start working on it several weeks before, so that everyone has time to chime over it and make different iterations of it. And that process you learn too.
Now, one other thing is how you present. We have talked about how you write your abstract, how you prepare your poster, but how do you present? So one of the speakers said half is actually how you present and half is how is your poster. So this presentation part is very important, regardless whether it is podium presentation or it is a poster presentation, right? So I tell the students that, think about a car salesman, right? You walk into to buy a car, and the person in that store comes, okay, if you need any help, let me know. And in another place you go, that person come and explains everything to you. A lot of excitement, right? So your poster, when you present, is your excitement, your spirit. You cheer the audience up. You cheer the, judges. Last year, Dr. Chow and I and some other people, we were judges. And one lady, she was, I think she's doing cardiology fellowship at Hopkins now. Every time a judge comes and she starts from the beginning, and her enthusiasm, her excitement, and the spirit doesn't diminish with presentation. So every time she's very excited about her poster because she thinks this is the most important case in this room, and she has a lot of things to talk about. So your excitement is very important. If you are not excited by your poster, your case, then nobody else is going to be excited. Number 2 is timing. If it is a 3.5 minute presentation, you want to make sure that you have practiced it enough that you can do it in 3.5 minutes. If it's a 10-minute podium presentation, you want to make sure that you complete it in 10 minutes. So practice as many times as possible, and your excitement and being flawless, and the flow should be very smooth when you are talking to people. That is important. You will have to write a transcript, and So I have actually a lot of success where I worked before. So I was in Missouri. And so every year, 1 year out of 9 awards, our resident got 6 of them. From one program got 6. So the reason is practice. We had a stopwatch. I asked all of them to write their what they are going to talk or how they are going to present. So they will write it up, show it to me, they'll review it, we'll review together, and they'll almost memorize and practice. And then before they go there, they'll practice with me in front of other audience so that there's no hesitation, and then go there, perfect delivery. So that's important.
Those are such wonderful, important points. Thank you so much, Dr. Kausar. I think people think a lot about practicing when they are giving the oral presentations, but think less about it with the poster presentation. And that actually is an oral presentation where the judge walks it up and you have a certain amount of time to gesture and emphasize and tell a story. And a good presentation is drama. It's acting. So make sure you know what you want to say and what you want to emphasize and what you want to show enthusiasm for. It's the worst thing in the world. My most frustrating thing is when someone starts with an apology. They start their presentation by saying, well, I don't really know, or this is going to be too long. It doesn't really fit. I'm done. If you're not that interested in it, I'm not that interested in it either. If you're sorry you're presenting, I don't really have that much time to spare. But if you start by saying, let me tell you what happened with this patient. It was so cool. This is what happened. This was what we did. This is what we found out. Oh man, I am drawn in. So keep in mind that you want to practice both the sort of podium oral presentations and the poster presentations when people walk up, how you're going to hook them in, what the story is you're going to tell, and how you're going to show some good drama when you do it. Practice. I love that. Good. And I see in the chat here, just make sure everybody sees the comments. Dr. Thomas, yes, thank you for making note of that. Please don't make up abbreviations. If I have to work really hard to understand what COQPTZR is, and it's 5 times on your poster, I'm just ready for the next poster. I'll be honest with you about that. So please don't do that. Please make sure everybody walking by who has kind of a basic medical knowledge can understand what's going on. Any other questions, comments, thoughts from our speakers? Anything you didn't get to say yet that you're thinking about?
The most important thing, have fun. Have fun. Enjoy the experience. It's awesome.
And this is the time to learn. Make your mistakes now. Practice. Get out there. What have you got to lose? You got a bunch of friendly program directors and faculty from the best chapter here in ACP. So we look forward to having you and And I hope you can see that the enthusiasm of all your program directors and faculty who are here today to just help you with this. We want you to succeed. So we look forward to seeing you with your posters.